Hello everyone and welcome to PragatiE Vichaar Break the Bias. This International Women's Day, we are proud, we are very excited to have Miss Arpita Das with us. She will be talking today about her experience as a publisher. She is the founder publisher of Yoda Press, an independent academic publisher in India. She is the alumni of St. Stephen's College, perhaps one of the most reputed colleges in India, in the University of Delhi. And she has also studied at School of African and Oriental Studies, London. Arpita leads the Yoda Press workshop series for authors and editors, and is also a member of the executive board of Publisher, which is a female publishing within the female publishing industry. Publisher, interestingly, is also one of the supporting partners with us during this International Women's Day celebration. She has also taught as visiting faculty on the creative writing programs at New Delhi's Ashoka University and as adjunct faculty at the School of Business and the School of Creative Expression at Ambedkar University. She frequently writes on book culture, publishing, popular culture, gender, and bibliotherapy for various outlets. Earlier this year, she became the series editor of the South Asia series at Melbourne University Press. Welcome to the program, Arpita.
Thanks so much, Kapil. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So, Arpita, you have been popularly known as an ally of the sexuality, popular Indian culture, and the LGBTQ community. Is this the reason that Yoda Press started with the same vision?
Kapil, it's one of the reasons that we started 18 years ago, at a time when the LGBT movement was really just starting out in India, particularly in Delhi. It was really at the very beginning, and of course, very soon Delhi became the hub of the movement because of the case against Article 377. So I think the vision at that point was to try and have a list which moved the attention of the reader away from what was, being read and discussed and constantly being promoted in the mainstream sort of publishing industry, and to try and not just become certain lists, which I felt were getting, you remember by this time we didn't have social media, but there was a fair amount of blogging beginning to happen. I'm talking about 2004, 2003, 2004. So there was a massive presence of the LGBTQ community in the blogosphere, but none of it was really getting published out or coming out in print. And to me, it felt like this is an author pool waiting to happen. And the movement was beginning to take shape as well. But it's a fact that there were many other such lists which I felt were gathering steam, but the publishing industry had not quite woken up to it yet. And I was working at OUP at that time as a commissioning editor of history and philosophy. And I could not, in my role as commissioning editor of history and philosophy, sort of push for lists like sexuality studies or popular culture. It just would not have gone with what they had given me as a brief. But I was getting more and more interested in these new lists and these new voices, emerging voices. And that's why I took the plunge. So it was part of the reason, for sure. Yeah.
Sure. Fantastic. And I'm sure it must have been a fascinating journey. Specifically considering most of the Indian publishing still tends to be a little bit more defensive, still tends to be a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, I mean, it was also really hard because at that time, if you're talking, I mean, you know how it is with our friends in distribution and in sales. I mean, a lot of understanding of what a sexualities list meant was lacking. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, I remember this time when I could use a line in Hindi, right? I can, right?
Absolutely.
So there's one of our friends in distribution said to me, because those books started doing well as soon as they came out, because there was an audience, just like there was an author pool, there was an audience waiting to get books on sexuality studies. There was already a very, very thriving and very, very active, dynamic LGBTQ community who were already adults and they were buying books, they were ready to buy books, which were not there. So the minute our books came out, the bookshop started ordering them. And, the first book we did was this queer anthology called Because I Have a Voice, which continues to sell even today. And it's taken on a bit of a cult status by now. And I remember this distributor called me and said, "Aap yo sex ki kitab kab aayegi? Ugly sex ki kitab kab aayegi? When will your book on sex?" And I was like, God, now do I explain to him how, I'm not publishing erotica, I'm publishing on LGBTQ. So there were a lot of challenges. It was hard to kind of talk about these books to the community that was going to sell them and take them out to the market. But it was ultimately, perhaps very, very rewarding because it was so hard. And ultimately, of course, when first 2009, when the Delhi High Court read back Article 377 and decriminalized homosexuality, then of course Supreme Court brought it back. But then Supreme Court then finally read it down in 2018. And between those two dates, 2013 was the massive Supreme Court judgment recognizing the transgender community for the first time in India. In all three judgments, 5 of our titles were cited in the Supreme Court judgment. So I really felt that, apart from the fact that these books have always sold out, this was like tangibly making a change. Despite being a very small independent publisher, we were doing something very, very concrete, and that meant a lot to us. Yeah.
Sure. So, you already said your books were cited in all of the judgments that happened. How important do you think, exposing queer literature is to the LGBTQ emotions and actually getting the broader population to have a better understanding?
Yeah, Kapil, where we were, say, in 2004, when we started the list, and we were very clear that, there needs to be a sexuality studies list or sexualities list or an LGBTQ readings list. And we were doing it with a single-minded kind of attention to a single list or a singular list. After the 2018 judgment, though, I now feel that we've come to a point, there's been a paradigm shift in the discussions around queer issues in the media, in society, in television, everywhere, social media, television, everywhere. People are talking about it more. There are more the silence has been lifted to a large extent, to the extent that the other day I noticed matrimonials.com is now going to be matchmaking between same-sex couples. They just put an ad out. Of course, the depressing thing is the first ad was Brahmin boy looking for Brahmin boy. And I was like, God, everything can change in this country, but not caste. That's the sad part. But so there has been a paradigm shift between the time when we started and now. So what I feel now is that all our books have to reflect a queer sensibility alongside any other kind of sensibility. I feel like we can't have a single list of queer literature anymore. I feel like, queer authors should write romances, should write genre thrillers, should write books on politics, because they are all, it's not like heterosexual people are told, create your own heterosexual list about your own sexuality, right? Yes. I think it's time we started making that shift where we took care as publishers that all our lists, all our books are queer ally books, that we are not publishing queer-phobic and homophobic books, and that queer authors are actually writing everything. So in that sense, my politics and my perception of it has shifted a little. And now I do feel that this kind of an opening up is very, very important. At the same time, things in society take a lot of time to change. The law will change, and then 100 years later, the society will still be behind in the times. I mean, we see that with caste in our country, of course. So I do feel that standalone books which talk about the queer experience and it are continue to be important. And for me, as you said, what's more and more important now is books about queer lives, about what LGBTQ people go through, what transgender folks go through, what non-binary folks go through, living in a society like ours. I think it's time that we started telling those stories more and more and more, so that there is different kind of a connect, which, as you use the word emotion, and I think that emotional connect is very, very important. I mean, we are doing this book soon by a wonderful young author called Homeless, and it's called Growing Up Lesbian and Dyslexic in India. And I think, these are the kind of stories that I think we need to sort of mine and bring out and make available very, very widely. Thankfully, this book of ours will go out through our Simon & Schuster joint imprint. So I know it will be available widely. I know it will be read widely. And that's what is required right now. Giving them faces, the community. They're not just a community. They're people all around us, right? Individuals. And they have these lives which are very similar to any other heteronormative person's life.
Sure.
And very different.
I can certainly see the passion that you have around this subject, and I guess I would love to come back someday and have a discussion with you specifically focused around the LGBTQ community.
Absolutely.
I'm sure as Frontlist we'll come back and do that. But let me bring you back to
publishing
of the day, the important aspect of the day. So
and today's, yeah.
You have also been associated with Publisher as a board member. How has it been, working with other women members from the publishing industry, as everyone comes from different cultural backgrounds with different perspectives, specifically considering Publisher, which has, a wide-ranging women from across the globe participating in it?
Yeah, Kapil, actually, that's the part that has been really super exciting for me. Of course, as you know, the board has 10 of us members from very different publishing industries from across the world. So there's someone from Nigeria, there's someone from Jamaica, there's someone from Australia, there's someone from Canada. I mean, it's really, really sort of pan, sort of worldwide kind of a representation. And we're led by the incredibly visionary Bodul Al-Qasimi. And I feel like these kind of trans border, friendships and collaborations between people who identify as women, I think these are very, very important, because a lot of the times, and I'll be very frank here, when you belong to the same publishing industry, there is a sense of competitiveness, or there are different kind of cliques or groups in place. And as an independent woman publisher of a certain age, you might feel that you're not really being taken on board in that sense, or that you have to buy into a different kind of a clique in order to have these sort of collaborations. For someone like me, that's very difficult. I am an independent for a reason. I am not just an independent, in a tokenistic fashion. And I'm not really keen to belong to these different pressure groups and lobbies or whatever that every industry has. I want to do my work and say what is important to me. So in that sort of a situation, I find Publisher has been amazing, because it's put me in touch with kindred spirits among women in different parts of the world, a lot of whom have similar problems, similar challenges, and they are using very novel strategies to deal with those problems in their industry. And we really sort of learn from each other. We can reach out to each other when there is when there is a situation of kind of crisis or challenge, and really pep each other up. I mean, I can't tell you how wonderful it was to have the publisher board members reaching out to me when the first lockdown happened and our sales fell to zero, and I was like, what's going to happen? I shut down my office space. And also during the second wave, because they heard things were really hard. And it was just a thing about reaching out, offering some suggestions, help me clear my mind, help me feel I'm not alone. And there was that sense of community. And because they were trans-border, it was a trans-border community, they don't have any vested interest in my kind of immediate ecosystem. So they could be really generous and honest, and I could take it in the right spirit as well. And I think that has been fantastic. The other thing is Publisher does some brilliant mentoring. And this is something they've been doing since before I became a board member. And then I was part of the mentoring program in 2020. And I think, that is again sorely missing in a lot of publishing industries. And why it's important is because a lot of the publishing industries across the world are led and peopled more by women. But there is this sense of, okay, what happens next? Where do you go next? How is my career path going to be determined? What choices should I make? A lot of young women are facing these questions, and they're not necessarily mentoring programs in publishing industries to help them work through these things. And I think Publisher really, sort of gives a lot of focus on this, puts a lot of focus on this, and that is fantastic. And I hope that's a culture that grows into publishing industries. And the third thing I'd mention is Publisher is very committed to the idea of diversity and inclusion. Their diversity and inclusion toolkit is absolutely novel. And I mean, all of us board members were part of that process. We worked together to sort of fine tune it, to bring in more aspects. There's still more things that will probably come into the second edition that came up in further discussions among us. And I think that's a real starting point. If a publishing firm says, I really want to commit to diversity and inclusion, I don't just want to pay lip service to it, I really want to have a more diverse employee pool, which is sorely needed in a country like ours, it's a great place to start. So I think, of course for women, but I think all of us women together in that space, I think we've created some really solid things that the entire industry can use. And that's been very exciting as well. I don't know if I've answered your question, but yeah.
You certainly have. And
because I could go on and on about Publisher.
My experience with Publisher has been amazing as well. When we decided to do today's event, and we connected, with the brilliant board members from Publisher, the responses from them came so instantly that it almost seemed like they are as keen to put their point across as we were to interview them and bring it out to our audience. It's been a fabulous experience. In fact, I don't want to sound complaining, but I haven't seen that kind of an interest and enthusiasm from the Indian publishing industry. We have had people who have come and who are participating in today's event, but the overall enthusiasm, I think I saw it much more in Publisher. So it sounds like a wonderful group. Now, as Yoda Press, you have done numerous collaborations. You have a joint imprint with Sage Publishing. You also have a collaboration with Simon & Schuster. Can you talk a little bit more about those collaborations and how you are taking Yoda Press to the next level?
So, when they say, independents also have some definition of scaling up, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of very, experienced businessmen in my publishing industry will often laugh when we talk about being independent and being small, and because they feel that there is no future to a list of this sort. So let's just say that we have a different definition of scaling up. Scaling up doesn't mean that we have this massive office and bring out 100 books every year and have 50 employees or whatever. What I figured was, for a small independent like me who still wants to have a larger presence, a wider presence, collaborations are how I can grow. Mm-hmm. And which is why I was very clear when we started these joint imprints, as we call them, first with Sage and then with Simon Schuster. And of course, both these, it's not coincidence that it's these offices, these firms, because these firms are really led by people and teamed by people who are very egalitarian, who really have a lot of respect for not just the big, but the small as well, and the small quality publisher. So both Vivek Mehra at Sage India and Rahul Srivastava at Sam Schuster India, they, I think they took this on board with a tremendous amount of commitment. And they understood that I was not asking them to either distribute me or to buy a stake in my company, right? And I think, of course, the collaboration with Sage goes way back now. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think we've probably done 8 years with them, 7 or 8 years with them. And all our academic books go out through Sage. And Vivek was the one who really devised this model right in the beginning of having this joint imprint with us. And we were the first people to sign up with them for this. And then, of course, he did a similar thing with Sri Samya in Calcutta and Popular Prakashan in Bombay, and with Costa as well. But, we kind of devised it. We were the first to kind of sit together and devise it. And the idea was that the fact that we both feel equal in terms of the vitality of our roles and the status in that imprint was very, very important. And I think we put things in place to make sure of that and to make sure that it truly benefits both companies in ways that are tangible, not something that is there on paper, but actually, what's happening for me is only on paper and tokenistic and doesn't really work so well, and vice versa with them, that they're doing us a favor or they're taking on a charity case, which obviously a large publishing house, for-profit publishing house, why should they? So once we sorted this out, and then a few years later, when I took it to Simon Schuster, to Rahul, and I said that, for our other books, which are more kind of retail-oriented books, would you do the same with me? And he frankly didn't change a thing in the model. He looked at it and he said, this works really well for you, I can see. And this will also be very fair for us. And we just went for it. And so it's been 8 years with Sage. It's been 2 years now with Simon Schuster. Of course, it's been the pandemic years with Simon Schuster. So we've started slowly. We brought out 2 books last year, which was the first year. And we are about to bring out 2 more books. And probably 2 more books by the end of this year. So 4 books this year with Simon Schuster. Sure. And with Sage India, it's become, there have been years we've even done 7 books with them. But I think we've I think we're doing about 5 books a year with them. Sure. Because now, we did the first 25 very rapidly with them, with Sage. And then the pandemic happened and everything slowed down. But it's come to 5 a year.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I certainly, certainly understand your part about wanting to be an independent organization that has a lot of charm and a lot of value to it. In fact, we as Frontlist, and going all the way back to the other organizations I run, like OM Logic, we've always believed in that thought that it gives you the luxury, it gives you the freedom to experiment. At times, it gives you the luxury to fail, get up, and kind of create something bigger, to take those
and learn.
Exactly.
And learn.
Absolutely. Yeah. Versus follow, a prescribed model on what would be successful. As an entrepreneur, I think that risk is what we all live for. Otherwise, we could as well be, doing a job that pays as well.
Yeah, I think, Kapil, for the longest time, you get it, right? Our industry is a bit of a male bastion in terms of, you get that, especially where we are in Delhi, the whole Daryaganj, etc., which I know really well because my father was in the industry as well before me, although we never worked together. So I'm very familiar with it. But the thing is, for the longest time, I felt I was on the back foot, as an entrepreneur. And I'd always say, okay, yeah, I can't really talk so much about profits. And then immediately, all the older men would be like, oh, then are you even a business? Why don't you? But now I can, and now I can say that I'm scaling up, but in a different way. It's a
Sure.
different strategic, novel sort of way. I'm spreading wider rather than scaling up vertically, perhaps. So I think that defensiveness has gone out of me, and I'm much more sure of what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nice. That feels really good. That feels really sort of rewarding. Yeah.
Sure. Amazing. It's been 18 years since the inception of Yoda Press. Can you talk about some of the initiatives that you have taken to encourage women authors?
So, I mean, we have, let's just say that, for any, if we are commissioning someone for a particular topic, I would say the first instinct for me as a commissioning editor and my two colleagues whom I'm training as commissioning editors now, the impetus is to always look for women or people from the LGBTQ community to write those books. That has been our commitment.
Sure.
And so that itself, skews the list in a particular way, in a way that we like, which means more women. I'll give you an example. I was very keen 3 years ago. So we did this very, very successful book with Sage which was a translation of a lot of Bhagat Singh's writings, which had never been translated to English. And for that, I went to the person I felt was most equipped to do the introduction and supervise the translation and the editing of the book, which was Professor S. Irfan, who's an old friend of mine from the OUP days. It is a brilliant academic and a particular expert on Bhagat Singh and the Indian nationalist movement, particularly the role of revolutionaries. And that book, of course, has done really well because, there is a thirst for more writing by Bhagat Singh. And when that book really did well, I had this thing in my head that I want to do a graphic biography, like a graphic novel on Bhagat Singh's life. Because there's a new generation that needs to discover him afresh. And not just as a martyr, but as an intellectual, because the man read and wrote massively, and he was a very, very gifted thinker and intellectual, and I wanted all of that to come out. And I remember thinking that, all the Bollywood stuff has been directed by men. So they all focused on his mardangi and his martyrdom.
Yeah.
And so the person I reached out to was this young Sikh woman, graphic artist called Ikrup Sandhu. And she, of course, immediately, she loved the idea and she started work immediately. And we're bringing it out on his Martyrdom Day with Simon & Schuster on that joint list. It's called In Clubs Zindabad, a graphic biography of Bhagat Singh. And I mean, this was the best thing I could have done, to have found a woman to tell Bhagat Singh's life.
Sure.
If we wanted to see him differently from the way we had grown up seeing him on Bollywood screens. And movies and comics are often compared. So I wanted that sensibility to be entirely different. And I knew that I'd get it from a gifted woman graphic artist. So I think, there is every time a commissioning opportunity presents itself to us, where we think of a topic or a subject that we want to book on, I think we always try and go looking for women or LGBTQ authors. And that has been the most important strategy in making sure that our commitment to this pool of authors has remained consistent.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Indian publishing industry, while I guess editing and an editor's job has become more women-centric these days, and we see a lot of publishing houses, they claim equality based on the fact that they have editors as women. What do you think need to be done to encourage more entrepreneurs, to encourage more founders, to encourage more women to come in and start some setup in publishing rather than being editors or, I don't want to take, a job away, but a job versus starting a company. How do we encourage more women to come in publishing as founders and owners of what they do?
Kapil, I think we've had a lot of brilliant women founders in India. As a matter of fact, the reason, for instance, look at people like Urvashi Butalia, Ritu Menon, Mandira Sen, Radhika Menon, Indu Chandrasekhar. The list is endless. And they've all set up brilliant independent publishing houses with lists which only produce quality books.
Sure.
Right? And as a matter of fact, if you speak to all of them, I'm dead sure one part of the narrative is that beyond the point, I knew there was a glass ceiling in the publishing house where I was working. And so I decided, might as well start my own thing. Sure. Right? In my case, the impetus was more that I felt I wasn't working on the kind of books I wanted to work on. But I'll tell you something, even when I was working at OUP, I felt that they were looking for a certain kind of woman, if at all, to lead the kind of setup they had there. Sure. It was a woman who spouted numbers, didn't necessarily know much about the subject or the content or whatever, but sure, spouted numbers and could work on Excel sheets nicely. That was, I do that perfectly well. I run my own business, but that's not something that excites me, right? I wouldn't want to do that day in and day out. Sure. And also kind of woman who then, decided to only wear pants and become like the other men CEOs of the industry. Sure. Again, why should I do that? Then what am I bringing to the table that's different in you, right? So I think a lot of women who went out and started their own thing, and there are so many that I just named, and more still who are joining the setup. Now there's Ruby Hembrom, there's Mariam Henna, so many new publishers, founders who are coming into the scene now, who are women. At the same time though, Kapil, I feel like, why can't the decision makers of the big companies be women? And, my friends, my contemporaries are now those who stayed with the big publishing houses. They're exceedingly gifted, talented publishing women. They are all now at the level of publishers and publishing heads, and they'll immediately say, we are the decision makers. But having run a business, I know and you know that the decision makers are the CEOs and the CFOs. Yep. It's the people who run the executive decision making and the financials, especially of such large outfits, who are the decision makers. So when we start seeing more women CEOs, then I'll say, okay, things are really changing. And I think we talk a lot about this in Publish Her symposia as well, workshops as well, because this is something that is there. Interestingly, we see this in a lot of countries and some in the West as well, that the glass ceiling does still exist. Sure. And maybe it's between the editorial or publishing head and the finance and executive decision making. Maybe it's risen till there, sure, but it's still there. And that also needs to be smashed. Sure. Because who am I to tell young women joining the industry, you must start up or do a startup or found? There are those who will do it, sure, but there are others who want secure jobs, sure, as professionals in a big company. And they should have the confidence that if they stick to their guns and do well, they can rise to CEO status. Why not? Right? I think that has to change in a big way in our industry. That understanding is still not there, sure, as far as I can see it. Sure.
Can you tell our audience a little bit more about, you mentioned workshops, can you tell our audience a little more about the Yoda Press workshops?
Yeah, so I was actually talking about this at the Seagull School of Publishing recently. I was doing a masterclass for them, and I have to tell you, I have to start by the way I started with them, which is that it started, frankly, when the pandemic struck, and I was scared out of my wits. about how I was going to pay my salaries. And so I have to be frank about this. I mean, we had done workshops for editors and authors in our office space, even in 2018 and 19, but few and far between. And we had enjoyed them. We've done them very slowly and, sort of not put any kind of urgency on them. But when I had to give up my office space because everybody went to work from home status and I didn't want to pay that extra rent, and sales fell to zero. And all our partners were also kind of going quiet because, you remember what it was like the first few months. At that point, my little team of like 4 of us or 5 of us, we sat together and we said that, okay, what can we do to make sure we survive this?
Sure.
And so it was a plan just for those first 6 months that we make the workshops virtual.
Sure.
And we did that, and it sort of exploded, and I think we slowly understood. I mean, not only did it, of course, keep us going through those months of no sales, and I was able to pay all my salaries and didn't even drop 1 month, but, or let go of anybody. And that would really hurt a small team like ours. Soon we realized that we were filling a real gap, and that there was a huge gap between the industry and authors, particularly, and there's a lot the authors are completely sort of clueless about, and they're also very intimidated by this so-called, this kind of a bastion of the industry, and how to kind of get past it and understand the processes so we can approach them better. And when we ran our editorial workshops, there was a fair amount of mentoring that goes into those workshops. As I told you earlier, that's an important thing in my mind, for young people in the industry, to make sure that they remain interested and they feel that there is a future, because now they can leave and go and work for streaming platforms and make much more money, frankly, So what is it that keeps them in something as quiet as publishing, right? And I felt that, that became a big part of our editorial workshops. And the other part was to also make them look at authors, try and make them look at authors as not sort of something, just a revenue generating entity, but as individuals, as people with whom they must build relationships. Because obviously my focus has always been commissioning. So for me, it's very important that I groom young people in the industry into commissioning, because that's where the new books will come from. And in both kinds of workshops, we found the interest is massive. I mean, right now, for instance, when we are doing something entirely different, we're running a poetry workshop with one of, she's an Irish author, and she runs these marvelous poetry workshops. So that's happening through our brand. We are getting feelers already. When is your next editorial workshop? From publishing houses, because they want to send their new hires to us.
Sure.
Right? So it's really built into a series that actually we find we cannot drop from even 1 month of the year. We have to keep it going right through. And as I said, recently, a lot of authors started talking to us and saying, we'd love to do workshops. So we did one with the writer and columnist Natasha Badwar on writing personal memoirs, which was hugely successful. And then there is this women's, urban sort of studies group called Why Loiter, which came up just before the big sort of explosion in women in public space, thinking around women in public space, which happened after the Nirbhaya incident. Why Loiter had come up, and they'd done this very successful book with Penguin called Why Loiter, just about a year or 2 years before that terrible incident, and this expanse in discourse around this issue. So we're doing a workshop with them next month, or I think next month, on women in public spaces and writing about that. Everything is writing focused. Everything is publishing focused. But we are now experimenting with how, kind of diverse our workshops will be. Then my teaching at Ashoka, my teaching semester takes a break for summer. So again, May, June, July, I'll run my author workshops.
Sure.
So it's just become something that is very important to us, but also we find very important to the ecosystem.
Sure.
And we therefore want it to grow into something not just annual, but we are now thinking, perhaps something like a virtual author center or author editor center, where people can reach out to seek solutions, to seek one-on-one consultations for problems that they're facing. Something like that. Frankly, there need to be a few more. So I have no problem with giving this idea out. I think there should be more than one in this country because it's got a massive author pool. And as you were saying in the beginning, authors are ready to pay for these solutions, for these strategies. So, yeah.
Yep, that has certainly been our experience. Authors in this country are, more comfortable with paying smaller amounts to get themselves promoted versus the publisher. Anyway, so to kind of sum it up on, this occasion, on the International Women's Day, what advice would you like to give to fellow women? Or, to fellow men for that matter?
Fellow men to be allies. That comes very easily to me. That's what I say all the time. Don't listen, instead of talking all the time and trying to drown out women, which is what we grew up with and grew up experiencing a lot in our families to begin with and then outside in the world. Listen more, listen to women, listen to non-heterosexual men. Try to understand what these different experiences are and how they are different from yours, because you are entitled as heteronormative men, you are entitled, you are privileged. You don't want to change anything for that reason because it works for you. But for others who are equally important, who are the other half of the population in the world, it doesn't work very well. And so be allies. I think that's what I'd say, particularly to heterosexual men, cishet men. To women, I think two things. One is, we've got to let go of all the stereotypes that we're scared of. When we speak, they'll say, when we speak with strength and firmness, they'll say, oh, she's shrill. And when we are being firm in our workplaces, they'll say, oh, she's too bossy. And various different kind of stereotypes that we grow up with right from home right to the workplace. I think we have to stop feeling scared of stereotypes. And we have to smash them at every point. And say that, take it or leave it. I think we have to become more no-sayers. I think we've all said yes too often and too much. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say what you're saying does not make sense. Can you explain that to me better? Which a lot of us don't say to older men because that, conditioned to be respectful.
Sure.
While they don't pay us any respect, it doesn't matter. And the other thing I would say is band together. I think solidarity among people who identify as women and the queer community, I think solidarity between those who are not entitled and privileged in every possible way. Of course, there are many women who are entitled and privileged in one particular way, and not in the other. So I think it's important, the solidarity. I think that cliche, strength in numbers, will never go away. It's one cliche which is written in stone and it will remain true to the end of time. And I think we need to really support each other and stand up for each other and stay together. Absolutely.
I guess it has been one of the most amazing things, specifically when we talk about women. Usually, anytime we talk about any discrimination, we are talking about a majority doing a discrimination against the minority. This, across the globe has been one phenomena where, 50% of the population is being discriminated against by the other 50% of the population.
Yeah, that's what patriarchy is all about.
Sure. I do have one last question before we end this. So while we talk about, women empowerment, and while we talk about, the role that men must play in the society to help or to ensure that there is a larger equality for women, for LGBTQ community, and for all other areas where there is different sorts of discrimination and oppression that may exist. Specifically for women, I do have one question that I wanted to ask you. There is a set of women that are empowered, that are, almost cut above the rest, that are, you could even say entitled and privileged. What role or what larger role should those women play? And, what would be some of the aspects that they need to do as we kind of move into this next gear of women empowerment to get a larger say or a larger equality in the society? I guess we keep talking about, the role that society must play. But at least in my humble opinion, there is a huge participation that needs to happen from these empowered and, let me not use the word entitled, but, empowered.
I think you can. I think you can. And I think, I'm one of them, for instance. But I do feel that's a very important question, Kapil. And I think the most important thing that privileged, empowered women can do, like me, can do, is to not speak for others. To not tell other women's stories, but to work to empower, help empower and enable other women who are not as entitled and privileged as we to come out and speak, tell their own story, to create their own narrative. Because for too long, just like, white privileged women spoke up and endlessly for Black women in the West, until Black women said, hello, let us tell our story. I think upper caste, upper class Hindu women in this country have spoken up for far too long for everybody else in the name of feminism. And I think it's important for us to now understand it's no longer feminism, it's feminisms. Yeah. That there is a Dalit feminism, there is an Adivasi feminism, there is Muslim feminism, there is queer feminism. And that sitting in my vantage point, better not speak for everybody. Don't even try to speak for everybody. That's where we get into trouble. And that is not fair. That's what, and I feel very strongly about that. Yeah.
Sure. So on that note, Arpita, it's been a fabulous conversation with you. I can clearly see the passion that you have for equality, both for the women empowerment section and as well as for the LGBTQ section. I would love to come back and have more conversations with you around some of these subjects.